It began on an unremarkable evening, the kind that settles over a suburban school parking lot like a soft blanket. The Colorado sunset threw long shadows from the swing sets and the lonely flagpole. 5 children were waiting, their small forms silhouetted against the dying light. Nothing seemed amiss until a single text message arrived, a digital whisper that would detonate a man's world. There was no preamble, no explanation, just 11 words that would unravel every thread of the life he thought he knew. In the chasm between shock and sudden, crushing responsibility, one man had to make a choice: shatter or hold the line. What follows isn't explosive heartbreak. It's quiet fortitude and clear-eyed justice, the kind that doesn't need to scream. If you believe you know the face of betrayal, you might want to look closer. This is where the true reckoning begins. It was just after 6:30 p.m. on a crisp Tuesday evening. Mike Anderson steered his sedan into a parking space at North Ridge Elementary, a routine he performed a few times a week, though tonight was not supposed to be one of them. His wife, Jessica, orchestrated their family schedule with the precision of a military strategist. Pickups, drop-offs, soccer practice, food allergies. Every variable was meticulously logged in their shared digital calendar. Leo needs his cleats by 4:15. Don't forget Amelia's dairy-free snacks. Sophia's library book is in the blue tote bag. But that Tuesday, there had been an unnerving silence. No reminders, no check-ins, nothing. It was anomalous, but Mike, caught in the undertow of his own workday, hadn't given it much thought until he realized he hadn't heard a single word from her since a perfunctory morning text. Now, sitting in the growing twilight, the glow of the dashboard clock illuminating his furrowed brow, a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. He instinctively checked his phone again. One new message. From Jessica. His heart gave a painful lurch as he tapped the notification. "I'm in Costa Rica. I need you to take the kids." That was all. 11 words. No context, no "I love you." No emojis, no explanation. Mike stared at the screen, blinking as if to clear a fog from his vision. He read it again, then a third time. The words didn't change. "I'm in Costa Rica. I need you to take the kids." Was this some bizarre joke? A catastrophic autocorrect failure? His breath hitched in his chest. What did she mean, take the kids? As if they were a package to be collected. Where in Costa Rica? Who was she with? Just then, his rearview mirror framed 5 approaching figures. Leo, his 11-year-old, led the pack, his backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. The 9-year-old twins, Olivia and Sophia, walked hand in hand, whispering secrets as they always did. 7-year-old Caleb was attempting to balance on a curb, while 5-year-old Amelia trailed behind, looking exhausted and small. All 5 were supposed to have been picked up by Jessica. Leo reached the passenger door and pulled it open. "Where's Mom?" he asked, his young face a mask of confusion as he glanced at the empty seat beside his father. Mike forced a smile that felt like cracking porcelain. "She had to go on a trip unexpectedly. An emergency," he managed, praying his voice sounded steadier than it felt. Didn't. His hands trembled as he leaned over to help buckle Amelia into her car seat. The familiar click of the plastic buckle sounding alien and loud in the ringing silence of his mind. The drive home was a surreal montage of traffic lights, the innocent chatter of his children discussing schoolyard dramas and what they wanted for dinner, and the incessant echo of the text message that had become the new, jarring soundtrack to his life. Back in the familiar chaos of their home in Denver, Colorado, once the children were fed, bathed, and tucked into their beds, Mike stood alone in the quiet hallway and dialed Jessica's number. He called once, twice, a dozen times. Each call was a new wave of hope that crashed against the rocky shore of her voicemail. He left a frantic message the first time, then a pleading one. Then he stopped, the futility of it all settling over him like a shroud. He tried FaceTime. Nothing. He scoured her social media profiles. No new posts, no tagged photos, no updates. Her digital footprint had vanished. He texted again, his thumbs flying across the screen. "What is this, Jess? What do you mean? Who are you with? Are you safe? Jessica, please just talk to me." There was no reply. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not for what felt like an eternity. In the days that followed, Mike Anderson was transformed into a full-time single father without a shred of warning. He made pancakes, wrestled with Olivia and Sophia's tangled hair, packed Leo's lunch, reminded Caleb to wear a jacket, and wiped away Amelia's tears. He soothed nightmares, cleaned up spilled orange juice, and plastered a brave, reassuring smile on his face for his children, all while surreptitiously checking his phone every 5 minutes, his heart leaping at every phantom vibration, praying for something, anything. But Jessica had evaporated like mist in the morning sun. He called her parents. They claimed to know nothing. He left voicemails for her sister that went unreturned. The silence was a wall, impenetrable and absolute. Finally, desperate for any information, he called the HR department at the marketing firm where she worked. A polite but distant voice informed him that Mrs. Anderson had requested an extended, unpaid leave of absence. It had been approved 2 weeks ago. That was the moment the ground fell away completely. Jessica hadn't snapped. This wasn't a sudden mental breakdown. This was a plan. She had orchestrated her departure with a chilling, calculated precision, leaving nothing behind but 5 bewildered children and a husband standing in the rubble of their life, asking why their mother was no longer there to kiss them goodnight. There was no warning, no goodbye, no explanation. Just one text message. And now Mike stood alone, the full weight of the household on his shoulders, with no time to brace for the impact. But even in the dense fog of shock and grief, a different feeling began to crystallize within him. This wasn't just abandonment. It was calculated. And though he had no idea what his next move would be, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He could not afford to stay broken. Not for a moment longer. 3 weeks. That's how long it had been since Jessica vanished. 21 days of deafening silence. 21 nights spent pacing the shadowed hallway after the kids were asleep, staring at the inert screen of his phone, hoping it would light up with a name that never came. Mike Anderson was no stranger to hard work or responsibility. He'd always been a deeply involved father, but nothing could have prepared him for the relentless onslaught that these 3 weeks demanded of him. School drop-offs at 7:45 a.m. Conference calls taken from the driver's seat of his car, frantic trips back to school with forgotten homework, spelling bee practice, an emergency trip to the dentist for Caleb's chipped tooth, Olivia's recurring nightmares, Sophia's silent tears, Amelia's bedtime meltdowns, and Leo's sudden, withdrawn silence. It was a perpetual hurricane with no eye and no end in sight. Each evening, he'd find himself in the laundry room at 1 a.m., folding mismatched socks and staring at the hypnotic tumble of the dryer as if it held the secrets of the universe. He was physically depleted, mentally frayed, and emotionally hollowed out. Yet, the most agonizing part wasn't the bone-deep fatigue. It was the complete, maddening absence of an explanation. Jessica vanished, no calls, no texts, nothing. Mike kept replaying her final message in his mind. "I'm in Costa Rica. I need you to take the kids." What kind of mother, what kind of human being sends that and simply disappears? What kind of wife and partner walks away from a life they built, from 5 children they created, with a single dismissive sentence? But it was more than the message itself. It was the galling assumption behind it, the sheer arrogance that he would just absorb the blow, that he would quietly crumble while she sipped cocktails under a palm tree, pretending her choices hadn't blown a hole through the family. She had expected him to break. And for a while he did, in the quiet solitude of his car or behind a locked bathroom door. But on the morning of the 22nd day, something inside him changed. He was at the kitchen table, staring at a plate of lopsided Mickey Mouse waffles. Amelia had cried the night before because she missed Mommy's special waffles. So he had tried his best, producing something that looked more like a surrealist painting than a cartoon mouse. But his children had smiled anyway. The house was quiet for the first time all morning. A neighbor, a kind single mom who had seen the exhaustion etched onto Mike's face, had offered to take the kids to school with her own. The gesture was a lifeline, but it was also a mirror. For the first time since Jessica had left, Mike saw himself with piercing clarity. Exhausted, used, and utterly alone. But not broken. With a newfound resolve, he opened his laptop, his heart hammering against his ribs. Jessica had always been dismissive of technology, leaving the setup of all their devices to him. That included their shared iCloud family account. He logged in, his fingers trembling slightly, and began to methodically sift through the automatic backups from her phone and laptop. He scrolled through thousands of photos, emails, and notes, and then he found it. An airline confirmation, 2 business class tickets. Destination: San Jose, Costa Rica. The traveler names listed were Jessica Anderson and Ethan Reed. Mike couldn't breathe. Ethan, his best friend since college, best man, former business partner. The man who had been the best man at his wedding, the one who had held Leo as a newborn and toasted to their shared future. The man he had started a business with, his partner for a decade, until Ethan had accepted a friendly buyout a year ago to pursue other passions. The man he trusted like a brother. Mike stared at the screen, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a surgical strike, premeditated and executed with ice-cold precision. She hadn't just run away. She ran directly into the arms of his best friend. She hadn't just abandoned her children. She had traded them and him for a fantasy. Something inside Mike hardened. The raw, aching heartbreak was still there, but it began to petrify, transforming into something sharper, colder, and infinitely more resilient. No more waiting by the phone. No more pleading voicemails left in the dead of night. No more torturing himself with the question of why. He knew why now. She had made a choice. And now so would he. But he wouldn't lash out. He wouldn't explode in a firestorm of angry texts or leave screaming messages on Ethan's voicemail. That's precisely what they would expect. A shattered man coming undone at the seams. No, he would do the exact opposite. He would become deliberate, calm, and strategic. He would become unshakable. He would protect his children. He would methodically reclaim his life. And when Jessica inevitably came crawling back, as people like her always do when the fantasy curdles, she would find a version of Mike Anderson she didn't recognize. A man who no longer asked for answers because he already had all the evidence he needed. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was planning. Mike Anderson did not rage. He didn't scream. He didn't fire off a single hate-fueled text message or leave a voicemail laced with the venom of his betrayal. That was the old Mike, the one who believed in second chances and heartfelt conversations. That man was gone, replaced by someone forged in the crucible of the last 3 weeks. After uncovering the depth of the deception between Jessica and Ethan Reed, Mike knew he had only one mission: protect his children and regain absolute control of the wreckage they had left in their wake. But he wouldn't do it with emotion. He would do it with the precision of a surgeon, dismantling a bomb with calm hands, a steady breath, and an unyielding focus. His first step was legal. He scheduled a consultation with one of the most formidable family law attorneys in Denver. Sarah Chun had a reputation for being a shark in the courtroom, known for her meticulous preparation and zero-tolerance policy for theatrics. Sitting across from her in a minimalist, glass-walled office overlooking the city, Mike laid out the evidence. The printed text message, the flight confirmations he'd pulled from the cloud, and a detailed timeline of every missed call and unreturned message since Jessica's departure. Sarah reviewed the documents, her expression unreadable. Finally, she leaned back in her leather chair, a single eyebrow raised. "She's cooked," she stated, her tone flat and decisive. The court takes a very dim view of a parent who abandons 5 children via text message to abscond to a foreign country with her husband's best friend. You have strong grounds to request temporary sole custody. I'll file for an emergency temporary custody order this afternoon. Mike simply nodded, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest of his chair. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. It was about re-establishing the structure and order that Jessica had so casually detonated. Next came the finances. With the guidance of a discreet financial advisor, Mike began the methodical process of protecting his family's assets. He legally and transparently transferred their joint savings into a new trust fund established solely for the benefit of his 5 children. He opened a new checking account in his name alone for household expenses and removed her authorized user access, documenting every change. She had left. He refocused every resource on the children. Every transaction was documented, every dollar accounted for, every receipt scanned and filed. If Jessica ever dared to challenge his actions, a mountain of paperwork would be his unwavering response. Meanwhile, back at home, Mike created a sanctuary. He never uttered a single negative word about Jessica to the children. He didn't poison them with stories of betrayal or plant seeds of resentment. When Olivia asked, "When is Mommy coming home?" he would answer calmly, "Mommy is away right now, but I am here, and we are all going to be okay." When Leo grew quiet and withdrawn, Mike would sit beside him in silence, a steady presence until his son was ready to talk. When Amelia cried for her mother at night, he held her, rocking her gently until she drifted back to sleep. His goal wasn't to erase their mother, but to build a foundation of stability so strong that her absence wouldn't cause the entire structure to collapse. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, they began to heal. They started asking about her less. The house, once filled with a tense, waiting silence, found its rhythm again. It was a new rhythm orchestrated by one parent instead of two, but it was consistent and it was safe. And all the while, Mike waited. He knew Jessica. He knew her patterns, her impulsiveness, her tendency to tire of things once the initial thrill wore off. The fantasy would fade. Reality always comes knocking, sooner or later. He didn't have to stalk her social media or track her phone. He just had to prepare. He signed every permission slip, packed every lunch, and served every dinner with a quiet patience that became his armor. Another month passed. It had been 7 weeks since the text. Still no word. Then, on a Friday morning at exactly 8:12 a.m., as Mike was pouring cereal into bowls, his phone lit up with her name. First a FaceTime request, which he ignored. Then another. Then a rapid-fire succession of 5 text messages. "Where are the kids? Why aren't you answering me? I'm back in town. We need to talk. Michael, this is insane. Call me. Now." Mike stared at the screen, his expression as placid as a frozen lake. Her weeks of silence had spoken volumes. Now it was her turn to experience what it felt like to be ignored. He felt no panic, no surge of triumph. He simply stood up, poured himself a cup of coffee, and began his day. Whatever game she imagined was already over. She just hadn't been informed of the final score. Jessica Anderson appeared the next morning without any warning. There was no apologetic phone call, no preemptive text, just the aggressive screech of rental car tires in the driveway followed by a series of frantic, demanding knocks on the front door. Mike opened it slowly, his posture calm, his heart beating a steady, measured rhythm. He already knew who was on the other side. There she was, tanned, but with a frayed, wired energy just beneath the surface. She wore oversized designer sunglasses pushed into her artfully messy hair and a flowy white blouse that looked like it belonged on a beach, not a suburban porch in Denver. She was the picture of someone who had been playing a role for far too long and had suddenly forgotten her lines. "Where are the kids?" she demanded, forgoing any semblance of a greeting. Her voice was sharp, laced with an unnerving sense of entitlement. Mike didn't move from the threshold. "At school," he replied, his voice even and devoid of emotion. "Where they belong." She made a move to step past him, but he held his ground, a quiet, immovable object in the doorway. "You don't live here anymore, Jessica." Her nostrils flared. "What the hell is your problem? I'm gone for a few weeks, and suddenly I'm a stranger in my own house?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even blink. "You are a stranger. You vanished. You sent me a text message as if I were the babysitter, not your husband. You didn't say goodbye to your children. You just disappeared." Jessica's voice faltered, a slight crack in her composure. "I needed space. I needed a break. I was overwhelmed, Mike." "No," he said, his arms crossed over his chest. "You needed permission to fly to Costa Rica with Ethan Reed and abandon your family. But you never bothered to ask for it." Her jaw trembled. For the first time since she had arrived, the concrete reality of her actions seemed to penetrate her bubble of self-justification. "You can't keep them from me," she hissed. "I'm their mother." Mike stared at her, his eyes unreadable. "I am already keeping them from you, and you'll be hearing from my attorney." That was the blow that finally landed. "You got a lawyer?" she whispered, the words catching in her throat as if the idea had never once occurred to her. Without saying another word, Mike reached for a thick manila envelope from the small table just inside the door. He handed it to her. Inside were printed copies of everything. The original text message, screenshots of his dozens of unanswered calls and texts, documentation of every doctor's appointment he'd handled, every school event he'd attended, every grocery bill he'd paid. And at the very top, the first page of the emergency custody order Saracen had filed on his behalf. Jessica's hands shook as she fumbled through the pages. I didn't mean for it to be this long," she stammered, her eyes scanning the cold, hard facts. "Ethan said it would just be a short trip. We lost track of time." Mike let out a single, humorless laugh. It wasn't a sound of amusement, but of pure, crystalline disbelief. "You lost track of 7 weeks and 5 children?" She looked up at him then, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I want to fix this, Mike." He tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. "You mean Ethan dumped you?" Her stunned silence was all the confirmation he needed. "You chose him over your own children," he said, his voice low and even. "And now that he's done with you, you think you can just walk back in and pick up where you left off?" Jessica opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "I made a mistake," she finally managed to whisper. "No," Mike replied, the finality in his tone like the closing of a vault door. "You made each choice, step by step." And with that, he gently but firmly closed the door. On the other side, he heard a sharp, choked gasp, followed by the sound of her slumping against it. The sobbing began a moment later, loud, ragged sobs. But he did not open the door again. He stood in the hallway, his hand still on the knob, breathing slowly and deeply. This wasn't cruelty. This was consequence. And for far too long, he had been the one absorbing the consequences of everyone else's actions. Later that evening, Saracen called him. "She just left my office," she said, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. "She tried to file a petition for joint custody. It was unconvincing. You beat her to the punch. The court is reviewing our emergency filing now. Given what we submitted, her petition is unlikely to succeed." Mike didn't gloat. He simply ended the call, turned his phone face down on the counter, and looked around the quiet house. He saw the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, the row of empty lunchboxes drying on a rack, and he let out a breath he didn't even realize he'd been holding for 7 weeks. Jessica was back. That door was closed now, and he held the key. Some betrayals end in shouting. The worst end in paperwork and a steady hand. If this story struck a chord with you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful tales of karma, revenge, and resilience. And if you've ever faced betrayal or found your own quiet strength, share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters, and you never know who it might inspire.